So we're going to do another problem. 1 minus cosine squared theta is equal to tan squared theta times cosine squared theta. This time we're going to try and get this to be similar to one of the Pythagorean identities. So I'm going to start 1 minus cosine squared theta is equal to tan squared is the same as sine squared theta over cosine squared theta. We shall have the cosine squared theta left. Now these are going to cancel out and we're left with 1 minus cosine squared theta is equal to sine squared theta. Now if you remember, 1 in Pythagorean identities is equal to sine squared theta plus cosine squared theta. We shall have the minus cosine squared theta is equal to sine squared theta. Now, as you know, the cosines cancel out and we're left with sine squared theta is equal to sine squared theta. So in this problem, what we basically did, we used the first Pythagorean identity as in sine squared theta plus cosine squared theta. Now we're going to do another problem, slightly longer problem. So we're going to start off with the first segment, secant theta times sine theta squared. So secant is basically 1 over cosine theta times sine theta, still squared, plus we're going to do the next segment, tan squared theta, which is, for that in parentheses, sine squared theta over cosine squared theta will still be multiplied by cosine squared theta. Plus, we're to the next segment, cotangent squared theta, which is basically cosine squared theta over sine squared theta, still being multiplied by sine squared theta. And this is all still equal to secant squared theta. Pardon me. Now we're going to simplify all of this. So 1 over cosine theta times sine theta is going to be equal to sine theta over cosine theta, still squared, plus our cosine squares are going to cancel out. We're left with sine squared theta plus our sines here cancel out. We're left with cosine squared theta. And we are still equal to secant squared theta. Our sine over cosine, as we know, is equal to tangent. The tangent squared theta plus our sine squared theta plus cosine squared theta is equal to secant squared theta. Now we know that this segment right here, this one says sine squared theta plus cosine squared theta is equal to 1. So we have tan squared theta plus 1 is equal to secant squared theta, and that is our second Pythagorean identity. And we can continue this because our second identity says that tan squared theta plus 1 is equal to secant squared theta. So we can set that as secant squared theta from here is equal to our secant squared theta here. We're going to do another problem. This one says sine theta squared plus cotangent squared theta times sine squared theta plus 1 over secant squared theta times 1 over sine squared theta is equal to cosecant squared theta. We're going to start, we're going to simplify that. We have sine squared theta plus, we're going to put this one in parentheses, we're going to do the next segment, cotangent squared theta, which is equal to cosine squared theta over sine squared theta, still multiplied by sine squared theta, plus we're going to do our next segment, 1 over put that in parentheses, 1 over secant squared theta. Secant is basically 1 over cosine squared theta. So multiplied by 1 over sine squared theta is equal to cosecant squared theta. Pardon me again. So now we're going to continue sine squared theta plus, we're going to simplify this, we're left with cosine squared theta plus, we're going to simplify that, 1 over cosecant squared theta is basically the same thing as multiplying 1 over 1 times cosine squared theta over 1 times our 1 over sine squared theta, put that in another parentheses, is equal to cosecant squared theta. Going to continue sine squared theta plus cosine squared theta plus, now our ones cancel out, we're left with cosine squared theta being multiplied by 1 over sine squared theta. That would simplify to cosine squared theta over sine squared theta is equal to cosecant squared theta. Now, we know that, again, this segment here, sine squared theta plus cosine squared theta is always equal to 1, plus cosine squared over sine squared is basically the identity for cotangent, and since they're both squared, we have cotangent squared theta is equal to cosecant squared theta. That is our third identity, which says that 1 plus cotangent squared theta is equal to cosecant theta. And because of that, we have cosecant squared theta is equal to cosecant squared theta. That is our third identity and our last question.